It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us from London, Nico Hines, world editor of The Daily Beast. How are things where you are? We hear there's a storm.
Yeah, definitely wet and windy. I survived a direct attack by my kids' trampoline earlier today, but I've lived to tell the tale, so I'm here with you. Good news that is. Pierre Aski, foreign affairs columnist for French flagship public radio station, contending with both the same storm and a transit strike, Pierre?
Absolutely. I'm staying at home because no transportation in Paris and a rainy day.
All right. Well, Catherine Field ventured out and has made it to our studios. We thank her, Europe correspondent for New Zealand Media and Entertainment. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It was very windy outside and there weren't many trains.
All right. Has it been stormy in Brussels? Mark Burley, correspondent for the French news agency AFP, is with us.
No, yeah, it's blowing up a wonderful bit of storm out there. It's going to be wonderful walking back home after this.
Okay, well, be careful, Mark. The World This Week, by the way, available for all to see and hear on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. Speaking of storms, the anniversary date of Ukraine's Maidan revolution had passed. Russia was claiming it had started its drawdown when shelling hit a nursery school near the front line in the southeastern Luhansk region of Ukraine Thursday. It was all hands on deck. That's been followed by a second day of shelling, with both sides accusing the other of provocation, and the leaders of the separatist regions of Luhansk and Donesk ordering the evacuation of civilians.
С сегодняшнего дня, 18 февраля, организован массовый централизованный выезд населения в Российскую Федерацию. В первую очередь эвакуации подлежат женщины, дети и люди пожилого возраста.
Catherine Field, this is not the way the week was supposed to end.
No, it's not the way it was meant to end. And it is slightly concerning now because moves have been going on in the area that shouldn't have been done. We were all hoping that diplomacy would work out. But yes, you're quite right. This is the largest military build-up since the end of the Cold War in Europe. No one seems to be quite sure exactly what the Russian president is going to be up to next. He's got announced more exercises over the weekend. No one seems to believe him that he is, some of the troops are pulling back. Certainly, one thing he does know is that the West is not going to go into Ukraine and fight him in Ukraine. That has possibly been the biggest indicator that he's got this week. That may not stop him from, I don't know, either some sort of military operation or continue these nasty little hybrid attacks that they've been doing all week, whether it be at a small attack on a kindergarten, these flag inches, or cyber attacks. But certainly we are now into a period of time where we really don't know what Vladimir Putin's going to do, and we don't know his state of mind. This is a man who's been holed up in the Kremlin because of COVID restrictions for the last 2 years. And if anywhere in the world is going to make you paranoid, is going to make you worry about who's out there, who's out to get you, it's going to be inside the Kremlin corridors for 2 years.
Yeah, hold up inside the Kremlin, barred the odd opening ceremony of a Beijing Winter Olympics. The flare-ups prompting accusations in diplomatic circles. The finger-pointing going all the way to New York to the United Nations Security Council.
И вынести на него свои ничем не подтвержденные обвинения в том, что Россия якобы собирается напасть на Украину.
And remember that while Russia has repeatedly derided our warnings and alarms as melodrama and nonsense, they have been steadily amassing more than 150,000 troops on Ukraine's borders, as well as the capabilities to conduct a massive military assault.
And meanwhile, as Catherine Field was saying, Russia's president insists he's not about to go to war, but as Vladimir Putin this Friday welcomed Alexander Lukashenko to the Kremlin, the president of neighboring Belarus, he announced he'd be personally overseeing joint maneuvers Saturday, joint maneuvers taking place just north of the Ukrainian border.
Ну и, конечно, We will obviously discuss regional matters and evaluate our military cooperation, as we are in an active phase of our joint military drills. Tomorrow, we will together take part in an important event with this cooperation. I am so happy to see you.
Nico Heinz, between the time you woke up this morning and now, how has your mood changed when you look at events on the ground?
Well, things seem to be heading in one direction, which is an invasion of Ukraine imminent. Of course, this all could be fakery. He could be tricking us again, Putin. But if you put together the clues that we've been able to gather from the satellite imagery and from the reality on the ground, it is seemingly leading inexorably towards men going in. I think today's evacuation of the pro-Russia rebel-held regions of Ukraine is by far the clearest indication yet. I don't think, put nothing past the Kremlin, but I don't think that they would bother to evacuate thousands of people into a refugee camp, which they haven't set up yet, apparently, somewhere in Rostov, if there wasn't a very good reason for them to be getting civilians out of the way. And the most obvious reason, because Putin does really know that Ukraine isn't about to invade that region. The most obvious reason is that he thinks there's about to be a huge explosion of violence there.
So has Vladimir Putin talked himself into a corner, Pieraski, where some kind of incursion is the only option?
Well, we still don't know. As Catherine was saying, that's the biggest mystery of it all. Things are moving into one direction. Indeed, the events right as we are speaking in Donbass, in eastern Ukraine, are very worrying and bear all the indications of an imminent war. But at the same time, Putin could really be playing with our nerves, the Ukrainian nerves in the first instance, but also the whole Western world's nerves. So we still don't know whether his long-term objectives, his short-term objectives, is he going to just go to war to control Donbass, or is he going to go all the way to Kiev? He has 190,000 troops, according to the Americans, and that could allow him to play any scenario that he wants. So it's really one of the most incredible case studies for wars in modern times.
It's incredible because we're coming off the tail end, Mark Burley, of a summit in Brussels. And when it began, we heard the EU's foreign policy chief tell, in fact, Pieraski's radio station, we think that the escalation capped when Emmanuel Macron went to Moscow. That seems like a long time ago.
Well, I think we're seeing certainly the Americans are pushing very, very much, if we're to believe them, they're pushing out hard intel into briefings and making it very much look like the scene is set for an imminent invasion. I think on the European side, because they're not always privy to the American intelligence, and American intelligence has been faulty in the past, it's perhaps taking just a little bit of distance, wanting to just add just a dash of skepticism, a bit of distance, a bit of wariness in there, because, the Americans have their own game to play in this conflict, as the Russians do. That said, as has been pointed out just a few seconds ago, and with all the news we're seeing, we seem to be in this tunnel heading towards certainly something happening. You don't evacuate these rebel-held areas in the east of Ukraine without, another development happening behind that. And of course, as we've been reporting, in just over an hour's time, President Biden will be speaking with various Western leaders, a lot of European leaders, Macron, the leaders of Italy, the head of NATO, the head of Canada as well. There's a video conversation happening in an hour's time, after which President Biden will be making a public address. So we'll be learning a bit more, but certainly the information we're getting, the leaks we're getting, and the actual facts on the ground we're getting seem to indicate this is a lot more serious than perhaps a soundbite that happened yesterday.
Nico Hines, it's got to be serious if the UK, as announced by Home Secretary Priti Patel on Thursday, is scrapping golden visas. You pay money and you get a fast track for a visa. Some 2,500 Russians have taken part in this scheme.
Yeah, it's been a real stain on London, in fact. You know, we have this government that's obsessed with immigration targets and only letting the right sorts of people in and having to have special quotas and all of this nonsense that won them the Brexit referendum. And at the same time, they've been happily accepting if you're willing to bring certain huge sums of money into the country, then, oh, yeah, sure, you can have a visa, which kind of makes it sound like Cyprus or some kind of dodgy offshore money laundering institution, which in fact is what London has become. You know, the city is absolutely full of multi-million-pound properties owned by not just Russians, but owned by mysteriously wealthy daughters of minor cabinet members from Putin's entourage, or the nephews or friends of people who are well placed in the Kremlin. And it's all very, very suspect. And there's no doubt that that channel of money, some of which finds its way into the coffers of the Conservative Party directly through political donations, has impacted Britain's ability and desire to challenge the Russian regime. Eventually, finally, that does seem to be changing.
Yeah, and Pierre Aski, when you live in glass houses, you shouldn't throw stones. There are oligarchs, plenty of them, who have nice homes on the French Riviera.
Absolutely. France is not as visible as London because it's not the capital, but there's a lot of Russian-owned property on the Riviera, and that will come in the public debate if war starts. But we should not underestimate what's going on. I think it's really a defining moment for the future of the world, because if there's a war started by Vladimir Putin in the next few hours or the next few days, the consequences will be felt for years, both militarily, economically, diplomatically, strategically. So this is really a key moment.
Is it back to the Cold War?
We are already in a Cold War, and if tomorrow there's this war starting in Ukraine, we're going to have a separated world where Putin will have no other choice than getting even closer to China and Xi Jinping that he has done, and the West will have no other means to protest than impose sanctions on Russia. That means cutting a lot of the links that have been established between Europe and Russia. So we're going to have a two-system world arising.
Yeah, and to talk about getting upstaged, the European Union welcoming 40 African leaders, their first joint summit in Brussels for 8 years, but it was all overshadowed by Ukraine and also by what proceeded in Paris, a French-led coalition announcing the relocation of anti-terror operations out of Mali. Mali, whose junta is under embargo for breaking its promises on the hand-back to civilian rule and for the cozying up to the Russian mercenaries of Wagner. French President Emmanuel Macron, once again, taking aim at the coup leaders when he made that announcement.
We cannot remain involved military-wise alongside a de facto authority whose strategy or hidden objectives we do not share. This is the situation that we're facing in Mali today. The fight against terrorism cannot justify everything.
A de facto authority. Is that the right language to be using? You'll be needing those Malians if you want to get your hardware and your men out.
Yeah, this is a really difficult time now for Emmanuel Macron. One assumes that French forces on the ground in Mali have spent the last 5 to 6 weeks starting to pack up and starting to look at which routes that they're going to use to get out of Mali. But let's look at that. Yeah, a strategic pullout is really difficult. And when you're driving these huge convoys with hardware, with everything you've got, and you're taking it through areas that are not that safe, you are liable to have landmines, you're liable to have drive-by shootings, guys on motorbikes. This is really dangerous.
So should the French president tone it down?
Well, I tend to think that he's reacting. Yeah, he should tone it down, but he does tend to be reacting to remarks that are coming out of Bamako that seem to be more for internal consumption than to wind up the French president.
All right, let's see if those remarks are for internal consumption. France spelling out again this 4 to 6 month timeline for completing its final pullout from Mali. Not fast enough, says the junta in Bamako this Friday.
The government of the Republic of Mali takes note of the unilateral decision of the 17th of February 2022 by the French authorities to withdraw military forces from Barkhane and Takuba in violation of agreements binding France and Mali involving other partners. In view of these repeated breaches of the defense agreements, the government invites the French authorities to withdraw the Barkhane and Takuba forces from the national territory without delay under the supervision of Malian authorities.
Mark Burley, 3 times during that televised address, the junta spokesman calls on them to leave immediately. Then afterwards, where you are in Brussels, the French president saying, no, we're sticking to our 4 to 6 month timeline.
Yeah, he said we're going to be leaving in orderly fashion. I mean, first of all, President Macron is sticking by the idea that this is not a failure. The mission hasn't been a failure. He said it was necessary, and they're going to be leaving in orderly fashion. Of course, he's coming into presidential election. He has to present this in the best way possible and still come out looking like a leader who knows how to handle his military even when they're going out the exit door. He said that as we've seen in Afghanistan and everywhere, leaving a country is a very complicated process. There is force protection that is involved in getting people, and there are other forces there. There's a UN stabilization mission there, which is also protected by the French and by the Takuba, the task force, which pulls in European partners as well. So you can't leave immediately under any circumstances anyway, because you're just basically walking targets, and it could be fairly catastrophic. Quite often, we see military surges going in to help the soldiers to leave. Anyway, so this is the line that Macron is taking, that he's going to do it all orderly, all step by step, and pretty much on his timeline, and not to be dictated to by the junta.
Yeah, and we thought, Pierre Aski, that we'd hit a new low in the relations between Paris and Bamako on Thursday, and then this announcement, get out immediately. How much further low could it go?
Well, it could end up with a total breakup of relations, which is not the case yet. The French ambassador was kicked out 2 weeks ago. Now we have this departure of the French troops and this ultimatum from the rulers of Mali, but I think there's still scope for deterioration. I think the military rulers of Mali are going to use the difficulties of the French as a way to rally the population around their regime. Don't forget that they are under sanctions from the neighboring countries, and so they really need to keep a strong support from their population. There's going to be a demonstration tomorrow in support of the rulers against France. And I think there's going to be some discussions between France and Mali. There's no other way if they want to get the men and the vehicles and the equipment. There are some 700 armored cars and tanks and trucks in Mali at the moment, so you cannot get that out overnight, and so unless there is a total breakdown of relations, I think some pragmatism at some stage will have to step in.
Some pragmatism at some stage. The French president, as you say, who's entering The home stretch of the campaign, 8 weeks to go till the first round. The incumbent's, by the way, taking his time before officially throwing his hat in the ring. Emmanuel Macron has until March the 4th to submit endorsements for his candidacy. So he's in no hurry to declare. He's high in the polls and happily watching the infighting among his rivals to the right. There was talk that conservative candidate Valérie Pécresse might give him a run for his money when she was nominated by her party, but she's yet to secure the endorsement of the biggest name of Les Républicains, former President Nicolas Sarkozy. This is images from a rally last weekend where Pécresse was clearly courting the far-right vote.
We will fight for secularism against those who want to impose Sharia above our laws. I reaffirm that the law of a republic is above faith. And we will include in the Constitution that no one can take advantage of his origin, his religion, to exempt himself from the common law.
She's gone down in the polls, by the way, since that rally, Catherine Field.
Yeah, and what is really concerning when you look at it is the one who's gone up is Eric Zemmour, who is even further to the right. So this is a real disaster for Les Républicains. I mean, the fact that they've now got two far-right candidates that are polling ahead of her.
What happened to her?
What happened to her?
Or what's happening to her, I should say. She's not.
You know, she's not a good orator. She really isn't good. She looks to me like a sort of standard French private school, public school product. You know, she knows how to walk, she knows how to talk, but she hasn't got that personal touch that we expect from our politicians these days. She's very wooden on stage. She doesn't quite connect with the voter. And the fact that she's seen so many votes going to the far right and she's leaping to get in on that conversation shows that either she doesn't have what it needs as a politician to be able to play around and be slightly vague, but also that she thinks she's going to get votes from these far right. And I personally think it's very dangerous. And it's very concerning when you look at France. I was at the presidential elections 2017. Emmanuel Macron got over 60% in the second round against Marine Le Pen. Now, if it was a Marine Le Pen Macron second round, he'd only get 55%. So, there's a big shift to the right in the French electorate. And there's a lot to play for because now they have seen so many populists come to power. You've got Orban, you've got, to a greater or lesser degree, Trump. So they can see there is a path to power and it's worth going for it.
All right, you mentioned a certain former U.S. president. Pécresse's loss, as Catherine was saying, is Eric Zemmour's gain, the far-right pundit getting several endorsements. He also got a Monday telephone call from none other than the Donald himself, the former U.S. President, Donald Trump.
He told me to stay true to myself, that the media were going to label me as brutal, but that I have to stay true, and that the most important thing is that I keep my honesty. And I believe he is right.
He has what I believe they call a Cheshire cat grin, Nico Hines, when describing that telephone call. Your thoughts on Donald Trump and Eric Zemmour talking?
Well, what a meeting of minds. I do think this is pretty big for Zemmour. If you cast your mind back to 2017, Marine Le Pen went all the way to Trump Tower in New York to try and seek a handshake with the global populist figure, and she was rebuffed. So Zemmour is one ahead of her there. And there does seem to be a sort of tit-for-tat battle between the two camps now, who can edge ahead. Because I guess most people think that one of the two of them will come ahead of Pécresse and advance to the final round. So it is really crucial. And I think Donald Trump's advice that Zemmour was repeating there is very good advice if you're going to be a populist leader. And there's no point in, people like Pécresse are going to be dilly-dallying, tip-tap, trying to appeal to some people on one side, trying to appeal to people on the other side, probably changing their messages from rally to rally. And that kind of thing doesn't go down well these days in an era when people seem to have acquired a taste for these never-changing populist leaders. And if Zemmour takes that advice, never backs down, never apologises, keeps making these strong, powerful remarks, there's a chance that it will eventually break through. And of course, we're looking at a potential presidential election in France now, which could be set against a huge land war in Europe, while inflation at home is shooting up. You know, it could be very, very rocky times. And it's those kind of rocky times when leaders that would otherwise be shrugged off by mainstream candidates, they could just have their moment to break through.
Just have their moment, that phone call between Zemmour and Donald Trump, not to the liking of Marine Le Pen, who this week, by the way, expelled her campaign spokesperson before he could jump ship to her rival's camp. She played it down, and she alluded to that 2017 trip to Trump Tower that Nico was talking about, 2017, which she had hoped for a photo op when Trump was president-elect.
I wanted to meet him before he became president. It would have been more interesting than meeting him afterwards, to be honest. It's great that he talked on the phone with the former president of the United States. Good for him. I hope that Donald Trump is doing well. But the truth is that he's no longer such a big deal in the political landscape.
Mark Burley, is she in trouble?
Well, when you're talking about, a populist path to power, and you've got at least 2, maybe 3 candidates all squeezed onto that path, I mean, you've got to think that somewhere, Macron riding high in the polls because of pretty strong economic performance in France compared to, other OECD pairs. It's like, I think, Macron could be perhaps looking with a little bit of glee with this sort of like shoving on the right, everybody trying to claim the same sort of very far-right policies that we presume some of them, if they got into power, wouldn't be able to maintain. It's really odd for me, having known France for so many decades, to just sort of see this absence of the left. I mean, Macron, who's a lot of people would regard as centre-right, which just pushes everybody, including Les Républicains, which would normally be the centre-right, so far to the right. So you've got all 3 of them just jostling, shoving their elbows into each other's ribs. It's, it'll make for an entertaining campaign. I can't wait until President Macron declares himself.
Pierre Aski, in this conversation, we've so far mentioned 4 candidates, as Mark Burley points out. They're either from the center-right, the right, or the far-right. The pollsters say what? Something like a little over 1/4 of the population might vote for the left?
Yes, but they might vote for so many candidates from the left. I mean, that's the main problem of the left, is that it's really split between egos, leaders, and programs, because there are very big differences between Mélenchon's radical left or Jadot, the Green Party, or Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, who is running very, very low in the polls. So there's no chance for the left in this election, and really the outcome will be, the real race in this election is who is going to be facing Emmanuel Macron, which one of the 3 right-wing and far right-wing candidates. And my guess is that Macron will prefer to have the most radical of them, Éric Zemmour, because Éric Zemmour is so brutal and so radical that every moderate person in the country, whether from the right or from the left, will vote for Emmanuel Macron. And that's the gamble of the president, that he will be re-elected with a very comfortable score if he has Zemmour in front of him, with really no danger of him winning this election.
As Mark Burley was saying, Catherine Field, still a long time to go. And you heard Nico Hines mention that once Macron does declare, we'll be talking about inflation. We might be talking about war in Ukraine. We all thought Éric Zemmour was going to go away once that Valérie Pécresse declared. That was sort of the what the chattering classes were claiming, hasn't happened.
It hasn't happened, and I think you could almost blame that on Emmanuel Macron, 2017. He destroyed the party system. He turned it into personalities because the parties all disappeared. He moved outside of the traditional French political parties. And it hopefully will get interesting once, if Emmanuel Macron declares, because
it's not if.
It's not if, I know. Come on, let's play the game. Yes, and you're looking at the statistics, a number of French people who just aren't interested in these elections at the moment, and the abstention rate might be high. And I think that's because they are worried about issues such as purchasing power, unemployment, climate change, all these things, and they're not being discussed. We're discussing, or we're hearing being discussed, these conspiracy theories that Eric Zemmour and now Valérie Pécresse are coming out with and making that the running and the conversation. And we're going to bring on some proper debate about where this country is going.
All right, so a new campaign is anticipated. Before we go, how fast a fortnight goes. They're already rehearsing for the closing ceremonies at the Beijing Olympics. Winter sports lovers have mostly gotten over the zero COVID policy that has kept fans away. So far, no surprise, free Xinjiang T-shirts during medal ceremonies. Instead, the controversies come from a familiar quarter. The Olympics ending in tears for the undisputed star of the Games, 15-year-old Kamila Valieva, who earlier in the tournament became the first female figure skater to complete a quadruple jump at the Games. The Russian competed in the women's singles. Despite revelations of a positive dope test, she fell. But that's not all. Valieva's coach, for all to hear, scolding her when she got off the ice. Eteri Tudberidze heard saying, "Why did you let it go? Why did you stop fighting?" The Russians even called out by the president of the International Olympic Committee.
When I afterwards saw how she was received by her closest entourage with such a what appeared to be a tremendous coldness. It was chilling.
Nico Heinz, your reaction to Thomas Bach's words?
Well, I think it's kind of sickening to hear him say that, given that he's been covering up for the disappearance of Peng Shuai for so long. But if we leave that to one side and take at face value what he's saying, it is true that video footage was really horrible. And you have to remember that this is a kid. This is effectively state-sponsored child abuse. She was pumped full of all sorts of drugs, some legal, some illegal. They seem to have found a cocktail of at least 3 heart medications in her system, and she has no known heart issue. God knows what other kind of drugs are in there that were well enough masked not to have been picked up in the testing. And not only is her body being abused in that way, she's being put through such brutal training methods that these young athletes are kind of abused and forced into training so hard that almost all of them break down and kind of retire by the time they're still teenagers. It's really quite awful, and I think
should figure skating be banned?
I certainly think children shouldn't be being put through these paces. So if figure skating can't be done by grown-ups, then yes, it should be banned. I don't know why 20-year-olds can't have a go at figure skating. So perhaps we could do that. But if you look at what Peskov said today, Putin's #1 spokesman in the Kremlin, it was put to him what Bach had said, and he said everybody knows that harshness is the only way to train to be the best athletes, and unfortunately, it's going to be difficult to get around that.
Mark Burley, Valieva has a lot of support back home. Your reaction to what we heard from Thomas Bach?
I've got to agree with the previous speaker. I'm a 15-year-old being subjected to all of this. I understand that to get to Olympic level, you have to start training young, start training intensively. But, I think it's really time to start looking at raising the age where, these athletes, these children have some sort of say over their bodies. Some push it back till they have informed consent, and that they're part of these bigger games. The politics of Russia, previously caught out for doping and going into these games with an apparent other doping scandal under the Olympic flag. It seems to me that there are no lessons being learnt, and maybe the rules need to be tightened a little bit more, at least for, when it comes to children, maybe just for the ice skating, the figure skating one, maybe more widely.
Catherine Field, of course, it's not just figure skating where athletes are precocious. There's many sports.
There's many sports. Gymnasts. Didn't we, well, some of us who are a bit older, have this conversation when we saw gymnasts like Nadia Comaneci. At
12 years of age, yeah.
And what we're seeing today is not new. It's just the same old sports story we've been seeing for the Olympics, which is a young person caught up in this web of superpower rivalry, and she's manipulated by her coach. This is just, it's nasty, it's horrible. We've done nothing about it. And for Thomas Bach to say that, why did he say that? They didn't say that at the last Olympics. Was it because cameras picked it up? And was it because all of this is on social media now? This is not new. What is new is we saw it. We saw what was said to her, and it's all out there for one to see. And I think, at the end of this, we're going to be very pleased that these Olympics are over. It does seem to be get them over and done with and finished. And, what are we going to remember from these games? We're going to remember Chinese oppression. No one was able to say anything about Tibet or human rights. And we're going to remember Russian doping. What sort of legacy is that for the Beijing Olympics?
Of course, you're saying that from the climate-controlled environment of a Paris studio. Pierre Aski, you're a former Beijing correspondent. How will the Chinese remember these games?
Well, the Chinese government has staged these games as a grand event that proves how big and how powerful China has become. So there's a big gap between what Catherine just said, which I agree completely, which is that these games are all to be forgotten very quickly, and the fact that in China itself, it has been a big event in the government propaganda, which is able to stage something quite extraordinary. But all this is really the ugly faces of the Olympic system. And really, Thomas Bach is the incarnation of that system. And I agree with Nico that it's the same Thomas Bach who has covered up the Peng Shui's scandal in an incredible way, and he now comes on the moral side of defending sports. So it is very, very nasty, and I agree with Catherine that the quickest it ends and the better it is.
And at the end of the day, it will be forgotten, and it'll be on to Paris. Nico Hines, the IOC will be able to ride this out.
Well, no one's going to cancel the Olympics. So in that sense, yes. But there's no doubt that the reputation has been sullied once again. The final joint press conference between the IOC and the Beijing organisers was an absolute disgrace yesterday when the Chinese spokeswoman kept interrupting questions and saying that it was all lies about what people had claimed was going on in Xinjiang province, that Taiwan was not a real country and that there was only one China. And this was all allowed to carry on at the official Olympic closing press conference. I mean, it really has got to a point now where the IOC is just really in a horrible, horrible mess. It needs a complete change. All of the IOC members need to be turfed out and replaced with sports professionals from other games and desperately try to restore some sort of credibility to what should be the greatest sporting event on earth.
All right, well, we'll wait for Paris in 2 years' time. And between now and then, we'll see if Nico's call for reform is heeded. Nico Hines, I want to thank you so much for joining us from London. I want to thank Mark Burley in Brussels, Pierre Aski, Catherine Field. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.